I made a full-length rated Geometry Dash level with just 29 objects. Yes, all the gameplay, these backgrounds, and all the triggers controlling them add up to only 29 objects. I had to do some pretty crazy and really cursed tricks to pull this off. First off, the obstacles. You need at least 60 seconds of gameplay for a full level, but that's like hundreds of objects. So instead of making 60 seconds of gameplay, I pulled a little trick. You see, the only obstacles I'll add in this whole level are these 4 blocks. The plan is to let the player fly through these, and once the blocks are off the screen, we move them back in front of the player to be reused. This gets really repetitive really fast though, so in addition, every time they move, we jumble them up a bit with 2 rotate triggers. The center they're rotating around is a large glow object, which also serves as some subtle decoration. Nice. But to make this last long, we now have to repeat these triggers over and over. Luckily, there's a clever solution to this too. This is a spawn trigger, and what it basically does is activate another trigger after some delay. However, we can actually just make it activate itself, which will again activate itself, essentially creating a loop. Now all we have to do is make it also activate these triggers, and we have achieved infinite gameplay with just 10 objects. To finish up the gameplay, we changed the game mode a couple of times with some portals to make it more varied. You can in fact skip these portals, but it doesn't really matter because it's the same kind of gameplay all the way through anyways. To actually make these parts distinct though, we need variety in the decoration as well, and we'll use some very clever tricks to make that happen. Let's start with colors. We can use the copy color feature to have all the colors be derived from a single color channel, so that we only need one trigger to change the whole palette. We'll change the color once for each part, including the first where we fade it in from black. The music also lends itself to some quite dramatic pulses, and we can make that happen by hooking a pulse trigger to the loop we already created, since the loop is already synced to the music. This becomes a bit harder than you might think though. Instead of making the pulse trigger choose the color of the pulse, which would mean we couldn't change the palette throughout the level, the trigger actually pulses everything black, but in reverse. So the perceived pulse happens in the space between the actual pulses. We also add another spawn trigger to offset the pulse trigger from the rest of the loop, so the perceived pulses sync up with the gameplay. This turns out to really fit the song, especially with the other decorations that will accompany it, which you will see in the full playthrough at the end of this video. Anyways, now we have a problem though, because the transition between the first 2 parts in the song actually makes the loop go out of sync. So we actually need to pause the loop for a while. To do this, we need to stop the loop with the toggle trigger, move the gameplay to account for the movement of the player during the pause, toggle the loop back on, and then start the loop again. We can actually use one less object here by using an instant count trigger, which when in activate group mode, both toggles and spawns the group at the same time for some reason. We only have 9 objects left now, and the tricks get pretty wild from here on out, so buckle up. Backgrounds. These are the backgrounds that are in the final level. Normally, backgrounds in Geometry Dash are created with thousands of objects, but these are created with not hundreds, not tens, but 3. 3 objects, total, for both of them. How? This is a text object. By default, all you can write in these is 20 characters on a single line. It's pretty easy to bypass the character limit with a hack, but you still can't have multiple lines of text, except if you go to this save file, XOR decrypt it with the key 11, base64 decode it, g-unzip it, go to the level you're working on, locate the encrypted level string, base64 decode it, g-unzip it, and then find the text object, find property 31, then base64 decode this. We see that this is a text we just inputted, and as it turns out, if you just replace this text with something with multiple lines, encode it and put it back, and then do all of those steps in reverse, the game will just accept that and render it with multiple lines. So now that we can make multiple lines of text with a single object, we can pretty much draw an image with that text. You wouldn't want to do this by hand though, so instead, I wrote a script to convert any image into a text object and insert it into the level for me. To make the actual source images for the backgrounds in the level, I drew the first one by hand and I made the second one in Blender. For this one, I rendered the Blender scene with 2 different lighting setups, converted both to text objects, and gave them 2 different colors to give the finished product a pretty nice aesthetic. To actually use them as backgrounds in the level, we need a move trigger to make them stay on screen. We'll use the swirly background in the middle part and the vaporwave background in the last part, leaving the first part empty for now. To do this, we line up the backgrounds like this and move them both each time the part changes. Instead of moving it twice though, we can use a pretty unknown trick to make this with one object. By setting the easing of a move trigger to ease in out, and then setting the easing rate to a really low number, it will make the objects move really fast, then slow for a long time, then really fast again. Doing this here will make the background quickly move in while hidden in the black pulse, then stay on screen for the duration of the part with a pleasant slow parallax movement, then quickly change over to the second background at the end, all with a single move trigger. We are nearing the end here, but the background is still pretty empty, especially in the first part. So let's add another detail. This is an object with a cool scaling animation that we can blow up with a scale hack to use as a background for the level. We can also set the speed of the object to match the speed of the music, and all in all, it turns into a pretty satisfying animation. I'll add in this one as well, which has the same kind of animation, and I'll give it a contrasting color and a slower animation speed just to make it more interesting. For this part, I'll move these two up so they match the position of the sun. Just because, I mean, come on, you can't just leave it like this. There's one last problem to solve, and one last object to solve it. Right now, the level actually ends at the last portal, because that's the object farthest to the right in the level. So the last object we add will also have to mark the end of the level itself. So I used the image generator I made for the backgrounds to make my logo, and added it to the proper end of the level, so that the level is extended to include the last part. That's it. Those are all the objects in the final level, which I will show now.